I want to actually synthesize something Steve and Krystal talked about, which is this issue of on the record, off the record, blind attribution, and what all these terms mean. And also, Steve also mentioned putting together facts, and something Andy also mentioned too when you're pitching a negative story. You want to have as much information possible prepared for the reporter for your pitch beforehand. It's not going to get you very far to call the reporter and go, hey, do all this research, go here for something that maybe could be a story. You have to go find the story. It's actually your responsibility, and it is something that I'm going to be talking about a little more too. It is unacceptable to blame the reporter when they don't think it's a story. It just means you failed to make your case. So the onus is actually on you to put the pieces of that story together that the reporter needs to be interested, to believe that it could be a story, and then to do the reporting necessary to make it a story. But that responsibility is ours. On the record, off the record, very briefly, on the record, very obvious, your name will be attached to a quote. It will appear in the paper. Off the record, it will not appear in the paper. You are talking on what's called background. It may inform that reporter's context and the way in which they maybe write about fact or what have you. Not for attribution is a quote that will appear in the paper without your name next to it. You will be designated an operative, a person close to the candidate with knowledge of the what have you. You work that out with a reporter. And deep background is, I'm telling you something, you cannot tell anyone I told you, here are all the phone numbers and people, others you should connect. That's called being a source. So I want to ask actually now Matt Wing, and I'm going to ask the reporters up here to talk a little bit about how do you actually do that? Because that's a little bit more varsity level stuff. So Matt is start us off.
Meaning just how do you negotiate between those different worlds?
How do you negotiate between those worlds, and how do you, by the way, do it right? Because doing it wrong can tank you.
Sure.
This is delicate, that's why I say it's varsity level communications.
Varsity. Let's see. I think what the description Alexis just gave of these, on record, off record, deep background, on background, that entire world only exists with trust with the reporters that you talk to. At the end of the day, I've actually heard those descriptions given different meanings, pretty much everywhere I've worked. People had different ideas. So the one big piece of advice I would give is just really be explicit and spell it out before you start those conversations, because you don't know what they think. I'm sure we've had those moments. And the other thing is, at the end of the day, it's about trust. It's about how long you've worked with the reporter, how well you know them. If you are trying to plant a story, there's something negative that you want to get out about your opponent. You don't want your campaign's fingerprints on it at all. If you're dealing with a reporter you don't know that well, or for whatever reason you don't trust, the best way to do it is that you're not doing it. That's someone who you have a relationship with outside of the campaign, in no way connected to the campaign, could never be sources. Part of the campaign is doing it, that whatever materials they're forwarding have no sort of stamp of the campaign on them. I think in the Jewish money list, that mistake was that was a pretty big mistake right there. Generally, just don't do that. That was just dumb. The other thing I would say is talking. The more you talk to reporters, just about anything, the more sort of trust you get, and the more you understand them and both what they're looking for stories, and the more you have a real relationship. It's just harder to screw something. Like if I ask Andrew to put something in off the record, it's harder for him to use my name, even though I asked him not to, if we talk once a week. Because that's just a hard thing to do if you're a human being. And it gives you a sense of who they are, what they want, of what they want from you, and how you can work together. And then the only other thing I'd add is just be really, really paranoid all the time about everything. Because that's just a good way to live life.
Just a quick point too. I think also that no self-respecting journalist would publish a blank quote that's just super nasty about an opposing campaign, that if you're saying, that other campaign, they steal money and they hate children, but don't put my name on it, we're not going to publish that because nobody wants if you don't have the guts to put your own name on an attack or some sort of claim about what that opposing campaign is doing, the reporter is in general not going to run that quote or that piece of information. So on the other hand, if it's more like you want to frame it as a question, I wonder why the other campaign is taking so much money from hedge funds or something like that. Maybe you should look into that, but don't put my name on it. That maybe we're talking about something here, but if it's just straight out, an insult about somebody else, but you don't want your name attached to it, I don't think any of the journalists up here would run something like that, because then you have to go to the other campaign and say, hey, if somebody who wouldn't put their name on it says that you guys are murderers and thieves, well, then that other campaign is not going to, it's just going to laugh at you at that point. So that's something to consider, I think, in all of this.
Yeah, I think the key to doing that right is coming with facts. Recently, I wrote about a DA in Columbia County, suburban county outside of Albany, and I wrote about a plea deal for her brother-in-law. It was a DWI charge. He had children in the car, so it was a Leandra's Law felony charge, and he was able to plead down to he didn't even get a misdemeanor. He pled down to a violation and paid a fine. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have any probation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, if the operative had come to me and said, hey, do you know about this? I hear he got off easy. Like, yeah, all right, whatever. Maybe, I don't really care about this. But if they say, no, here's exactly what happened. Here's how you can prove it. Get the court file. Get the court document. The court document is there. Now, we in the mainstream media, we journalists sometimes get attacked. I know this happens in Albany, and I don't know how robust the discussion is here. We get attacked for, well, why don't you reveal the source on that information? Why don't you tell anything? It's like, it doesn't matter the source if the information is true. I don't care if I got it from the opposing campaign. I don't care if I got it from the guy's brother-in-law, if it's true. So if it is a filing, or, we pulled the corporate records for this person's business and we found that they diluted the stock and they took profit of X, Y, and Z. If there is meat and if there are verifiable documents, you are on very, very, very sound footing, much sounder than if it's just, we don't like him, so why don't you publish a backbiting quote from a Democratic operative referencing a story that was in yesterday's paper. So when you're trying to do this, if you're trying to do this, or if your surrogates are trying to do this, that would be my first piece of advice. My second piece would be, think about, I think every journalist is different, so I'm only going to speak for myself, but I tend to be very, very skeptical of these things. If you come to me with something like this, my default is going to be that you're full of crap and that you're trying to sell me a load of crap. I'm going to be very skeptical of it, and I'm going to want to redo all the research that you've done. I'm going to want to be able to verify everything that you've put in front of me. And if I can't verify it, then I'm going to be very, very hesitant to rely on something you've given me unless you're willing to be cited as the source. Unless you in some way are willing to be cited as the place where I got that from. Which brings us back to the Jewish money clause, which is every attack cuts both ways. So I'll print your attack. If you want to call your opponent a Jewish money taker, if you put your name on it, personally I think you're stupid for saying it, but if that's your choice to say, that's fine. So I guess to the point, verifiable information to accompany something that's an off-the-record hit. Or if you want to be a little bit more subtle, and depending upon how you know the reporter, I would probably respond better to, hey Jimmy, here's what happened. Let me guide you to doing the research, because I know you're not going to trust me if I give you the research anyway. But let me guide you toward doing this research, and eventually you're going to come to the conclusion that the operative wants you to. And I don't feel bad about that, because it's true. It's there. It's true. I just look like an awesome journalist. That's fine.
This issue of how you, presentation, right? How you get that trust that Matt Wing talked about, how you get what Jimmy, the reporter to come to that conclusion, how you interact, because one thing we haven't talked about and what we vaguely reference is this practice of yelling at reporters that operatives sometimes do. This does not work, ever. And I kind of want to say, and I have a huge rant on this, and I'm going to say spare you all, but everyone up here is pretty familiar with. You should never be yelling at reporters. They have a job to do. It's valid. You will encounter some people in the press who are unscrupulous. Yes, I can think of one person who I just think is the worst. But that's one person. Overall, they are professionals, they have a job to do, and it's your job to get your message out, not theirs. Keep that in mind. So Reid, talk to us about that.
Well, I think Matt's right in that you want to cultivate a personal relationship or have somebody on your campaign cultivate a personal relationship with the reporter to the extent that you can. I mean, we're all busy, and so depending, on who the reporter is, you might find somebody at a local paper or somebody who's interested in covering your campaign and just say, can we, have a cup of coffee, have lunch one day, totally off the record, when you're not trying to feed them any kind of a positive or a negative story, and just sort of let them get to know you as a person. Access goes a long way with reporters. I think just sort of chatting with them, letting them know that you're a real person. And also just that you understand a little bit of how the game works. I mean, there's a certain threshold here. We have to decide who to cover. We have limited space and limited time. And you sort of have to convey yourself as somebody who's credible and mounting a credible challenge, especially if you're a new candidate who hasn't run before, probably taking on incumbent. You have to sort of come across to us as somebody who is worthy of not only our time, but the attention, on our blog or in our paper, or whatever it may be. And so you have to demonstrate a little bit that you know how the game works, and that you have either sort of the resources or the people behind you to make this thing credible. And I think that starts, with just sort of getting to know reporters, talking to them, telling them what you're about, who's in your corner, why you're doing this. And a lot of that can start off the record at a coffee shop somewhere or something like that. But that's sort of that's the foundation. And then once you have that, you can move on to the varsity stuff, as Alexis called it.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's important also to know the type of media outlet that you're trying to get to know, trying to maybe get some more coverage. There's a lot of different websites, newspapers, blogs, broadcast outlets, so many different types, especially in New York. I mean, it's obvious that we're just overrun with those types of publications. You've got your basic newspaper like Jimmy's. You've got an online-only publication like Reid's. You've got something that straddles both worlds, but it's also very insider like my own. So you have to decide what kind of journalists you want to get to know, what kind of media outlet you'd like to see stories written about your campaign in, and then approach that journalist and start talking to them. I think it's also really important to frame a story. I think Steve was talking about this before, but frame a story about your campaign, make it interesting. No offense to Lincoln, but a district leader race is not that interesting to most public publications, on the surface. But somebody like him also, he made it into something that was really interesting. There was him versus the machine party, the apparatus. He was coming at this from a very interesting angle, and that made it more interesting to cover. It made for a better story because it wasn't just about an unpaid position, sort of at the bottom of the political world. No offense, really, but it was much more interesting than that. It was more compelling. It had a better narrative, and I think journalists, for the most part, they want people to read their stories. They want to tell a good story, and they want people to pick up their newspaper, go to their websites, go to their read their Twitter feeds and see something that is compelling to them and makes them want to read more in their publication. We're not here to work for your campaign. We're not your communications directors. We're not your press secretaries. We're businesses as well. We want to sell good stories. So if there's a really good story involved in your campaign, I think you'll have a much better chance at selling whatever it is that you're selling.
And I would just say think strategically in terms of how you go about it. I mean, the very local paper, sort of the local patch site, is covering a more narrow area, has a lower bar, might get interested in you first. If you can sell your message to them and get some ink, then you can move up to the next rung, the slightly bigger paper. I mean, I know Andy's paper is often out in front in terms of writing about, candidates and sort of who's mounting challenges against whom. So once you get some credibility, you can go somewhere like that. They give you even more credibility if they write about your campaign, and then you go the next rung up. I mean, you can't expect like the New York Post or the New York Times to start writing about you right off the bat. I mean, we just had a big assembly race that was kind of a proxy battle for a lot of Brooklyn power brokers, and Andy and myself and other people were writing about it for weeks really, and then the New York Times about a week before the campaign sort of swooped in and did a long piece. But it's sort of a good example of how you build up and think of these things as different sort of rungs on the ladder in terms of building your own credibility.
With that, we're going to conclude. I want to thank our panelists up here. They're all actually really exceptionally brilliant in their keynotes, and we're very lucky to have them with us. And I want to conclude just by saying, I think the fundamental message we've underlined here is how important it is to develop a compelling message, but also that, like, the onus is really on the candidate and the candidate staff. And it is our job to make this newsworthy, interesting, relevant, and to facilitate the stories we want to see out there. It is, I think, never a good strategy to blame the media, yell at the media, or tell them they're stupid and incompetent, which is a strategy we see often, out of Mayor Bloomberg's mouth, for instance. But I think he manages to make it work a little bit. But I hope it's been relevant and helpful, and I think our panelists will be around here to answer some questions as we all meander our way out. So thank you so much for coming.